I had my son when I was in high school. After he was born, I moved in with my then boyfriend, now husband, and his mom and brother. They lived in this old run-down apartment on the north edge of our tiny town. The layout had our room with a bathroom immediately to the right, and we could see my brother-in-law's room parallel to ours down a short hallway. My son stayed in our room, which had just had a full-sized bed. I was still in school, so it was easier for him to sleep with us, so I wouldn't have to get up for feedings and could still make it to school the next day. It was a tight fit. My brother-in-law spent a lot of time away, so when he was gone, we crashed in his room because he had a king-size bed. But every time we'd go down the hall towards his room, my son would scream. He would keep me up most of the night, waking more than usual when I tried to sleep in there. I assumed it was the change in room, but we also had a cat that roamed the entire house, except he wouldn't go down that hall. I finally just stopped trying and stayed in our tiny bed. My son also didn't like to be in the bathroom, even for his baths. Now, my husband and his mum worked in a town an hour's drive away, so they would leave at 4 a.m. to get to work on time. One morning, something wakes me up. I look at the doorway of our room out to the hall, toward my Bill's room, who isn't home, and see someone standing in the hall. I think it must be my husband. Then I look at the clock and see it's 5, so my son and I are the only ones home. I sit up and he turns towards me. Half of his face looked like it had been burned. He turns away and walks toward the bathroom and dissipates. I shrugged, laid back down, and went back to sleep. This wasn't my first rodeo wide with weird ghost stuff, and I needed to sleep for school. We stayed there for a year while I finished high school. Husband graduated the year before, and then we went to college. Never saw the man again, but son hated the hall, back room, and bathroom, even when we came back to visit over the next few years. And in case you're wondering, we'll be married 22 years this year, and my son is 23 now. But there were other times over the years that I knew he was seeing or talking to someone I couldn't see. We've both even had an identical reoccurring dream about us having an accident that has never happened. Yet. He even got his own ghost encounter when he went off to college. My husband and our daughter, 17, never have weird stuff happen to them. The summer I turned 14, I spent a lot of time hanging at my cousin's, helping her take care of her kids. One evening, we had to take her daughter to the ER. So cousin, some relative from her mum's side, we'll call friend, but I didn't know well, and I took her. The hospital had a basement, ground floor, and then 3 more on the back side where the ER was. You enter on the ground floor in the back, but the first in the front of the building because it was on a slope. So because it was after hours, we entered in the back, which I had never done before. Now, I have no sense of direction when I'm in a building like a hospital, even to this day, let alone going in a different way than I'm familiar with. While waiting, my friend and I decided to go find a vending machine, which was on another floor. I can't remember which. We took the elevator, but couldn't find the machine. Nobody was around, and we didn't want to get lost, so we got back on the elevator. We got confused of what floor we were on and ended up going to every floor but the basement. I knew the morgue was there, but nothing looked right. We ended up on the 3rd floor, but when I stepped out, the hall was dark and I knew I was definitely in the wrong place. I jumped back in the elevator and decided the ground floor must have been it after all, even though it didn't look right. When I get back in the elevator and hit the button, the door closes. Then suddenly it opens again, but nobody is there. Then it shuts and the temperature drops. I look at my friend who's standing in front of the controls, and there's this blurry shape between us about chest height. Friend is frozen in place and not saying a word. Elevator gets to the ground and I jump out. Friend is still standing there. I reach in and pull her out. She snaps too. I ask what that was. She says, "What?" I say, "In the elevator." She has no idea what I'm talking about, so I don't say a word about it to anyone, because I think I've gone crazy. Fast forward a few weeks, and I'm at lunch with my cousin and her mom. We're talking about the hospital visits, but I keep the elevator ride to myself. Her mom starts talking about how she used to work the night shift at the front desk way back in the day. She says a little boy who was unalive used to ride the elevator down from the third floor, stand at the end of the hall, and stare at her for a bit. She'd say hi and he would eventually get back in the elevator and would go back to the third floor. She goes on to tell a little history of how the third floor was the TB ward way back when that was rampant, and people would leave their family members there until they passed, and then they were cremated on site. She believed he was one of the kids who had been left there. It was then that I went ahead and told her what had happened to me and my friend. She was convinced it was the same boy. The hospital was later shut down and another was built, but before it was, I did a job shadow the next year in high school with a social worker at the hospital. While with him, we took the stairs. He said to never take the elevators. The doctors would tell you because the stairs are healthier, but that's not the real reason. I was very much thankful to take the stairs, but I asked him the reason, but he wouldn't say. Went back one other time to visit a friend, but took the stairs then too. This took place in the early 1970s in Nebraska, in a little bitty town called Dorchester, not too far outside of Lincoln. My mom, abandoned by her first husband, did her best to raise my two older brothers. My brothers were aged 4 and 7. Times were lean and hard for the little family. With some help from my grandparents, Mom moved into a shabby old house located in town. The house had some history. It belonged to the railroad, serving as a boarding house for employees and passengers, dating back to the 1880s. It fulfilled that role until it fell into disuse. It was eventually made into a rental property. Mom noticed strange happenings surrounding the family, starting the day they moved in. Small rows of salt neatly poured on all windowsills and across all doorways. The family's pet Saint Bernard named Barney refused to enter the house. He stayed outside regardless of the weather or the time of year. To make matters worse, both my brothers uncharacteristically started wetting their beds. One morning, my brother, aged 4, played in the living room, yet he watched a specific section of the wall. Mom noticed he sometimes talked to a particular part of the wall. Mom was cleaning the house at the time, so she had one eye on him and the other on washing dishes. Figuring he was using his imagination, shrugging off his behaviour, she soon started vacuuming the living room. My brother sat there watching Sesame Street on the television. As she swept, she noticed my brother stand up and walk over to the wall he had talked to earlier. He then put both hands on the wall, slowly moving them up and down. He continued talking to the area, then broke into tears. Mom shut off the vacuum and asked her what was wrong. She said my brother turned and faced her, his face flushed and wet. Through his tears, he sobbed, "Mommy, there's a sad man in the wall. He's crying and he wants out. He is there, Mommy. See him? Can you see him? Help him, Mommy. Please help him." Mom quickly scratched up one brother and half dragged the other. She ran the 3 blocks terrified to my grandparents' house. My grandparents finally talked Mom into returning to the home a few days later, a feat that took much convincing, threatening, and reassuring. In the months after that event, a loud crashing bang sound often emitted from the attic. Mom described the sound as an adult taking a bowling ball and slamming it on the ground as hard as possible. A rolling sound soon followed the loud impact. Every time the sound occurred, it was investigated. Nothing was ever found. This happened both day and night. My grandparents both experienced this on many occasions. When the sound would happen, my grandparents said both my brothers would scream and go into hysterics. Mom felt terrified and trapped. She was bound into a lease and borrowed heavily from my grandparents to make ends meet. She had nowhere to go with 2 small children and couldn't afford to leave. Months later, my dad came into the picture. He eventually moved into the household. It was a damn creepy house, he said on many occasions. He hated living there the minute he moved in. Dad had returned from Vietnam a few years prior and was a combat veteran. Whenever he was in that house, a feeling of being watched with ill intent plagued him. Many nights for him were filled with terrible nightmares about the war. He had never experienced this before moving into the home. Mom said she would often wake up to find him pacing restlessly in the darkness. Other nights, she was awoken by the muffled screams of his demented sleep. One Sunday evening, the family returned home from grocery shopping. Upon unlocking the front door and entering the home, they found 4 dead blackbirds in the center of the living room. The birds lined up in a parallel row with their wings spread as if in flight. They each lay on their breasts. Heads and beaks were pointing towards a specific area of the living room wall. Instantly, the atmosphere was pierced by my brother's sharp, shrill, screaming cries. My father stood in the entryway. His arms were full of groceries. His mouth gaped open in utter shock by the insanity before him. My mom immediately turned and crouched to console the boys and shield them from the scene. It happened as she kissed and embraced her boys. A loud bashing sound hammered from the attic above. The windows of the house vibrated from the concussion. Dust slowly drifted down through the last rays of sunlight. Mom said the utter silence that followed was incredibly unnerving. Then, the slow, heavy rolling sound again filled the entire house. My dad set down the bags of groceries and made his way to the attic, cautiously approaching. Mom continued to hug my brothers. She happened to look past their shoulders onto the large front porch. She saw Barney there. The giant Saint Bernard lay cowered with his tail tightly pulled under him. The dog was unwilling to make eye contact when she called out to him. Instead, the animal shook uncontrollably. She noticed a large wet spot beneath him. Dad came down from the attic a few minutes later. Nothing was ever found, as usual. This was the breaking point for my family. My dad decided to sell his vehicle and worked overtime when possible. He paid off the lease at the first opportunity. He moved them all out of the house, and they never looked back. My dad said that once they left the house, they never had any other experiences like that. His terrible nightmares stopped. I travelled to Nebraska with my dad in 2002, and he showed me the old house, which was abandoned but still standing. Dad grimly jokes, saying as we drove by, "I wonder if that crying man ever made it out of that wall." It was the winter of 2000. I was in my hometown of Anchorage. This evening, I was relaxing on the couch, planning on watching another rerun of Seinfeld before turning in for the night. It's worth mentioning that my girlfriend at the time happened to be an Alaskan native. She had recently put the kids to bed and was taking a shower. My girlfriend's sister was visiting our home. She was staying in the downstairs spare bedroom. She was in town due to having some medical checkups scheduled for the following week at A&MC. We lived in a subdivision off Arctic Boulevard that bordered Chester Creek. This area is called Midtown. It's not too far from downtown Anchorage. I suppose the time was around 10 or 11 p.m. The moon was large and full that January night. I remember looking out the front room window, seeing the rooftops of the neighbouring houses sharply silhouetted in the glow. My dog lazily snoozed on the floor next to the couch. Eventually, my eyes also started to get heavy. This was due to the background noise of the television. Mixing with the quiet white noise of the shower had a calming effect. The baseboard heater quietly clicked and popped, wrapping me in relaxing warmth. I soon dozed off. Suddenly, I was woken by a sharp, jolting burst of sound. My eyes immediately snapped open in shock. This tone ripped through the tranquility of the peaceful night with gravelly croaking. There was no mistaking the sound, especially during the winter months in Alaska. This was the sound of the raven. I remember thinking, why the hell is a raven making a racket at this time of the night? I barely had time to finish that thought when I heard the bedroom door fly open and then the sound of hurrying footsteps. I look up in time to see my girlfriend, quickly putting on her robe as she runs to each kid's bedroom, anxiously checking on them. I sat up on the couch, still dazed from my interrupted sleep. Trying to get my head around exactly what I was seeing and hearing, and why all the commotion, I glanced over to the TV and saw static across the screen. The time on the DVD player displayed 3 a.m. in green light. The dog was up and alert. The hackle stood tall down its back. Suddenly, the sister quickly comes up the stairs. She had a genuine look of wide-eyed concern and alarm deeply etched on her face. Once my girlfriend made sure the kids were safe and asleep, she worriedly looked out each window. For what, I had no idea, until she stopped dead in her tracks at the window in front of me. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" the sister kept fearfully whispering to herself, slowly wringing her nightshirt in her hands, timidly shuffling across the floor towards the living room window next to her sister. I couldn't understand why both the sisters and the dog were having such an intense reaction. The scene was surreal. I found myself in a confused daze as I stood up and approached the window myself. There was the culprit perched on the handrail of our deck. I've always known ravens to be large birds, yet this bird seemed utterly massive this close. The bird was so black that its feathers took on a deep, purplish way in the moonlight glow. Its large, round, inky black eyes assessed each of us individually. It intelligently eyeing us up and down as it sharply cut its head from side to side. It yet seemed to take a greater interest in the sisters. This bird carried an intense, still, and heavy presence. It showed absolutely no fear of the humans that stood before it. It methodically stretched out its neck and opened its beak wide. A few seconds of silence passed until it made a sound I had never heard from a raven before or after this bizarre night. The mournful cry it made reminded me of the wail of a small infant. The raven slowly weaved its head in a low figure-8 pattern as it made this continuous cry. The moment that sound filled the night air, a cold chill prickled down my neck and across my back. I was filled with a sense of loneliness I had never felt before. I quickly glanced over at the sisters. They were tightly clinging to each other, knuckles white, with teary eyes keenly locked on the bird's bizarre display. I immediately thought that I was witnessing something I was not meant to see. I was very much an interloper in a personal exchange. Once the bird finished this almost ritual-like behavior, it quietly eyed both the women for a few more moments before leaping off into the night. An item lay where the bird once perched on the railing. Curiosity getting the best of me, mixed with the desperate need to escape the strange and awkward atmosphere that overcame the room, I heaved open the half-frozen sliding door to enter the deck to retrieve the item. The weather outside is bitterly cold. I instantly regretted my decision as my body went into an immediate shiver. The skin on my face was tightening while my ears and nose burned painfully. The snow squeaked loudly beneath my bare feet as I gingerly approached the item. The mystery gift left behind soon became clear. A small bundle of needles from a spruce tree lay on the barren rail. Clearly, the women were both shaken to their core that night. A quiet melancholy soon followed and lingered heavily on the sisters. Continuing through the following days after the bird's departure, the reason why was unknown to each of us. Yet, I had a strong gut feeling that it was not my place to talk about what we each saw. A few days passed. Once I got off work, the three of us decided to take the dog for a walk on a community trail not far behind our subdivision. Heavy cloud cover filled the sky over Anchorage that evening. Large snowflakes slowly fell. The walk was mainly dark, except for the occasional light pole that sparsely dotted the trail, washing the path in a fluorescent glow. The sounds of 6 p.m. city traffic droned in the background. We talked among ourselves when we heard a man's low, weak cry for help in the darkness ahead. We immediately stopped and listened. The dog's ears snapped forward, head pointing slightly off the trail. A long, whimper-like growl emitted from the animal's core, followed by a concerned huff. Once more, we heard a weak, agonized voice call out, pleading for God's intervention. The cry drifted through the snow-laden spruce trees that lined the trail. I glanced down and noticed a footpath in the snow, leading through the woodland in the direction of the cries. I hand the dog's leash to the sisters and tell them to stay put. Both women sharply plead for me not to go as I continue into the murk to investigate. As I weave my way through the tiny trail, my feet bust through the upper crust of snow and I sink to thigh depth. I continue to slog my way forward. Before long, I come to a clearing in the trail. In the darkness, I can make out the silhouette of a lone tent. I call out as I approach the tent, only to be met with silence. When I'm closer, I noticed a battered tarp draped over the tent shell haphazardly. An inch of snow lay on the tarp, and the cheap tent bows under the weight. The unzipped tent entrance gave the appearance of a gaping black mouth in the gloom. I strained to look inside and call out a sharp hello. Not a sound or any movement came from the tent. My concentration was suddenly broken. Irritated and worried calls from the sisters rang out, demanding for me to come back. Before making my way back to the main trail, I investigated the campsite. Piles of trash littered the area in dark mounds. I made out some of what appeared to be scattered empty food containers. White trash bags ripped open full of miscellaneous used clothing. Broken children's toys lay beside empty beer and alcohol containers. Piles of empty aerosols ladled canned air peeked through the snow. Frozen clothing remained hanging from the hacked-up trees that surrounded the site. A deep, low sobbing drifted from behind me down the trail from where I came. The women again loudly shouted for my return with urgency. I quickly made my way back to the sisters. They both pointed to the direction from where the cry came from. The focus was down the wide main trail that eventually opened into an empty city park named the Valley of the Moon. We called out as we cautiously searched the entire park. The only response was the muffled noise of a city in the winter. We made our way to a metal-roofed pavilion. Underneath the structure sat a few graffitied, weather-beaten wooden picnic tables. This area was the only spot in the park not covered in snow. We decided at this point that it would be best to call APD and inform them of everything. We did precisely that. APD arrived, performed a search, and found nothing. Being late, we now started for home. We were making our way through the playground, passing a tall rocket-shaped jungle gym, when the sister gave a sharp, loud gasp. We glanced over to see she was looking upwards. The city lights reflected a deep red way on the heavy snow-laden clouds, revealing a large black silhouette of a raven who sat silently perched. We all felt the familiar heaviness of its gaze. My stomach tightened as we continued forward, lowering our faces from the pelting snow while picking up our pace in our walk home. 2 days later, the morning came for the sister to leave. We were getting ready to drop her off at the airport when my home phone rang. My girlfriend answers the phone. I was loading the sisters' bags into the truck when I heard loud shouting and screams coming from the house. I soon found both women crying hysterically for their nephew. Alfred was a quiet boy who grew into an even quieter young man. He was raised in a village in southeast Alaska by his grandparents and aunties. Alfred became heavily addicted to alcohol. So much so, his family sent him to Anchorage in hopes of treatment. Unfortunately, the treatment never took hold after many attempts. Eventually, he found himself homeless on the streets of Anchorage. He was ashamed of his situation and refused to return home, ignoring his family's pleas to return. He steadily continued to sink deeper into his addiction. Alfred became a living ghost in the urban landscape. He survived living hand-to-mouth by panhandling and stealing. Being afraid to sleep at the local homeless shelters at night, Alfred preferred to sleep where he could. One cold night he closed his eyes and never opened them again. The Spenard Community Patrol found his frozen body early the following day. The police report stated Alfred's body was found in a fetal position. The man was lying on top of a picnic table underneath the pavilion at the Valley of the Moon Park. When found, it was also mentioned that his body was covered in spruce boughs in a desperate attempt to stay warm. The night Alfred died was the very night we received our visit and gift from the mysterious raven. Unbeknown to us, 3 days after Alfred's death, we heard the sad cries for help in the park, the same park where he died. I'd often wondered, looking back, if the raven kept silent watching over him that bitterly cold night when he passed away. Maybe Alfred was able to catch a glimpse of its dark silhouette in the yellow moonlight, high up on its perch. Perhaps he also felt the heavy gaze upon him during his final moments. We'll never know. I like to tell myself the bird was there, and Alfred found comfort in the gaze, knowing he was not alone. He would have a companion during his final walk through the dark wilderness in his eternal journey home. The sisters and their family never once referred to this mysterious bird as Raven. They called it by its original ancient name, the name given to it by their people in myths and legends centuries ago. The name Sacred Jarl. The story took place in 1989 or 1990. My family recently moved to southern Indiana, and we settled in a small town a few miles outside of Corridon called Central. For those of you that don't know, this area is out in the country. It was my freshman year in a new high school, yet I eventually met a couple of buddies who lived somewhat close to me. One morning in class, one of my friends mentioned this old farmer who lived not too far from his place, outside of a little town called Mountport. This old farmer passed away some months back, and there didn't seem to be anyone around his property. Urban and country legend was that this old farmer had his own catfish pond on his property that he stocked. The fish in this little pond were reportedly huge due to him not letting anyone fish on his property except him. That was all we needed to hear. Each of us loved fishing, and we made plans to stay at my friend's place that weekend and go after these fish. The weekend arrived, and the three of us found ourselves at the crack of dawn, standing in front of an old, shabby-looking farmhouse situated in the middle of an overgrown field. It was by no means a working farm. The house did appear vacant, and there were no vehicles around. Behind the house was the legendary pond. We immediately set to work trying to catch these gigantic fish. The entire time we fished, the dark old house seemed to loom in the background. We quietly spoke among ourselves, wondering what happened to the old farmer. My friend said all he knew was one evening, he saw an ambulance out front of the house with its strobe lights flashing. A few days later, his grandmother told him the old fella had passed away that same night in the home. He was very elderly and lived by himself due to being a widower. As the hours passed without even a nibble, it became clear the only thing biting were the bugs that swarmed us. By that time, the sun was beating down on us, making us sweat and quite miserable. Soon, boredom overtook us, so we decided to give up on our dreams of catching monster catfish. We packed our stuff and started to head back to my friend's house. I was walking towards the road, giving my friend hell, good-naturedly, about his fanciful tale of trophy catfish and mysterious geriatric farmers, when our other friend shouted out, "Hey guys, the front door of this place is open. Let's check it out." We both looked at him, then dumbly looked at each other. Being the young idiots we indeed were, we nervously agreed to drop our fishing poles and decided to explore cautiously. What struck me as odd immediately upon entering the home was that it was still fully furnished and looked lived in. The decor was dated in the 50s through the 70s era, dusty and very cluttered. The power was shut off to the house. The only light we had was whatever daylight made it through the filthy curtains. Inside the house, it was suffocatingly hot and stuffy. The house was filled with the stank of garbage, rot, mold, and nicotine. We could hear a scurrying sound that we assumed was either roaches or mice upon entering the kitchen. We found overflowing trash cans and rotten food sitting on the messy countertops. Dirty dishes piled high in the overfull sink. There was a constant buzz that droned inside the house. This was due to the many flies trapped between the curtains and the windows. The atmosphere was very heavy and depressing, so much so that I felt a bit sick in my stomach. Once we made our way into the living room, We were met by a peculiar sight. The telephone was a typical old-style rotary phone mounted on the wall. It had an extremely long cord. The receiver lay on the floor, stretched to the middle of the room. It was dead. Next to the phone's receiver, medical debris lay haphazardly, scattered across the pea-green shag carpet. Ripped open rectangle-shaped wrappers of various sizes, dirty gauze pads, small, hard plastic orange caps stood out in the gloom, due to being the cleanest items in the house. A dirty, torn old button-up shirt also lay in a heap next to wadded-up blue latex gloves. We walked around the lower rooms, and they were all pretty much the same. Dust, extreme clutter, memories, and pictures of someone's life. The house had 2 levels. We made our way up the old, narrow wooden steps that creaked incredibly loud during our ascent. The temperature upstairs was almost unbearably hot. All of us were drenched in sweat. The already rank smell of the house was now made more pungent by our body odor. Being there were no windows in the stairwell, we were in complete darkness, fumbling and feeling our way up the stairs. We could barely see a dull glow of light shining through the closed curtains on the upper level ahead. We made our way to the top of the steps and noticed 3 rooms. We made our way into one of the rooms. The lighting was very dim. While slowly making my way towards the curtain to let some light in, I stepped on unknown items on the floor that loudly crunched under my feet. I pulled open the curtains, and the light immediately blinded us. As our eyes adjusted, we saw we were in a bedroom. A room that looked like it had not been slept in for many years. Dirty clothing was strung across the bed and across the floor in piles. The lone mattress was water-stained and full of holes, as well as the sagging ceiling. The floor was full of mice droppings, plaster, and the exoskeletons of hundreds of insects. I vividly recall a single framed black and white photo sitting on an old dusty nightstand of a young couple in an embrace. The man was in a military uniform with his hat jauntily placed on his head, with a stoic impression. The woman, with a feathery hat of her own, smiled brightly, holding a puppy between them. My buddy made his way to the next room. It was a small room with a large closet that seemed to be used as storage space. The walls had shelving that held many jars of various pickled fruits and vegetables, all covered in grime. The floor was packed with canning equipment, jars, pots, containers, and tarnished utensils. We turned our attention to the last room and noticed the door to this room was closed. We opened the door and saw blackness. Our eyes were now adjusted to the light and could only see a few feet into the room. I once again carefully made my way to the window and opened the curtains. When the light came in, we were surprised at what we saw. This room, yet dusty, was immaculate and organized. In the corner was a small bed, neatly made with stuffed animals. A wooden toy box sat at the foot of the bed, full of old children's toys. Tiny shoes and boots lined the wall next to the door. Under the window, a child's small wooden desk and swivel chair were on the wall. The name Lauren in crayon was written on the desk in a child's handwriting. On the desk of drawers was a picture of a little boy in a Lone Ranger outfit, standing next to a pony. I was suddenly overcome with a feeling that we really needed to leave now. I turned to say the same to my friends when a tremendously loud crack blasted through the silence, so much so that I thought it was a gunshot. We all literally jumped in fright. Both my friends immediately pointed to the wooden chair with looks of shock and fear on their faces. The time during this moment was in ultra slow motion. I remember my heart pounding in my chest so hard, I felt the pressure throb in my ears. I glanced back just in time to see the small swivel chair quickly rotate with so much force that it sent the desk crashing into the wall. We froze and stared at each other with mouths open in stupid disbelief. Suddenly, my friend bolted for the door. This move triggered a full-on flight response in the remaining 2 of us. The only thought I had in my mind as that second was that I would not be the last one in line. I would run up and over my friends if they got in the way. In fact, I'm pretty sure I rode one of them halfway down the stairs as he tripped in our panic sprint for the front door. The funny thing afterward in the days that followed is we tried to convince each other we didn't see what we did. Instead, we accused each other of pulling off a trick, making the chair do that. It then morphed into teenage male bravado, making fun of each other's masculinity during our frantic dash for the door. Deep down, we knew there was no trick. There's no faking the fear we saw in each other's eyes that day. That happened. To this day, I still can't explain how. I moved again about a year later and eventually lost contact with my two friends, such as life. Yet, before moving away, I learned that nobody claimed the estate once the old farmer passed away. From what I understand, the state took it over. A company eventually came out to sell and auction off the valuable items and disposed of the rest. I'm not aware of what became of the property or the house. I know the state became owners of 3 fishing poles and a tackle box that day. We left them behind in our haste and had no intentions of going back to get them. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. Demons, religions, ghosts, spirits, angels, etc. My life has been a rollercoaster on this front, but I firmly believe in the super and paranatural, and have for the past 7 years now. But that rollercoaster is a very, very long ride, and I'm really, really tired right now. So I'm not going to talk about that just yet. But I can't go to sleep without typing this small post out, or else I won't go to sleep at all. Because something is already in my room. Investigating the paranormal draws things to me. But even thinking about the paranormal, casually thinking about it, inquiring about my experiences, all of this draws unknown entities into very close proximity to me. Outside, inside, out with friends, in private, in public, it doesn't matter where I ask or think. They always arrive when I start and slowly leave when I stop. Demons? Ghosts? Spirits? I don't know. And frankly, I'm not strong enough to try and find out. But I can sense them. Invisible things that stare and watch and step closer but never touch or make sound. You know that feeling you get when someone is watching you from behind? Imagine that, but 10 times or so. They're harmless, luckily. The lights might flicker once in a blue moon, or they might get right up next to my face, but nothing terrible ever occurs. A few years ago, I was going through a really rough patch after an unexpected job loss. One random day, as I'm walking out of the grocery store with my then 10-year-old daughter, I get this sudden urge to look to my left. I'm startled because I can see my grandma, who passed over 20 years ago, staring back at me. She had on a long white lace dress. Her hair was curled and she looked to be mid-40s. I kept my gaze for like 10 seconds as she slowly walked away, and I screamed, "Oh my god, I can't believe that's her." My daughter, who has only seen pics of her recently, exclaimed, "Yeah, that was your grandma." I get chills to this day thinking about it. I thought back to what she was wearing. It looked to be a dress not from modern times, similar to what she wore at my parents' wedding in the 80s. Another story is more recent. This past Mother's Day, I went to visit my biological dad's mom at her gravesite. As I'm talking aloud to her, I smell this waft of perfume around me. I look around the cemetery because I'm sure someone must have walked by. No one else was around. She loved perfume, so I immediately knew it was her. A few weeks go by, and I get a visitation from this grandma. In my dream, I was walking into a church and several other people walked past me before she walked towards me. When I saw her, she looked so beautiful, like she was literally glowing. She had on a long dress with flowers on it, and her hair was down and curly. I can recall every single detail of what she was wearing, down to the shoes. She looked like in her 30s, and she was smiling so big. I hugged her and told her I miss her, and she said I love you and miss you too. I noticed she was walking without her cane too. She hugged me so tight, and in that moment, it felt so peaceful, like a feeling of divine love, serenity, and bliss. She then whispered in my ear, "Peace be still," and that was the end of the dream. I woke up crying and shaking because I was shocked that she had actually shown herself to me. When she died, I pleaded for her to come and visit me and send me signs. I think she gave me that message because I'd been going through anxiety and depression. Now, whenever I feel down, I think of the two guardian angels I have watching over me. I just got home from work. I walked in and I noticed the curtain rod in my bedroom on the floor. This is a pretty sturdy rod with two pieces of steel and has been there for years. I look around the apartment just to be sure I'm the only one there. I texted my husband and asked if it had fallen down before he left the house. He said no. I go to the bathroom to comb my hair, and all of a sudden, I hear the plastic on my shower curtain rustle like someone was in the shower. I have a cloth curtain and a clear vinyl liner behind it. I literally heard the magnet on the liner clank against the tub. I peeked behind the curtain, but nothing was there. I don't have any pets. A few years ago, I came home from dropping my daughter off at school. It's about 8 a.m. in the morning. As soon as I walk in, the light in the hallway next to this same bathroom turns on, then off by itself. I noped it out of there. Back when I used to work from home, I would hear dishes in the sink clanking around or knocking on the fridge, and I heard the blinds rustling next to me. I was laying in bed awake one night, and I saw this blue ball of light flash before me and dart where that same hallway is. I got up to investigate, and the circuit breaker door was flung open. It was the type of latch that requires some force to pull back and secure it closed. The last thing that I could recall happening was when I was in the living room reading something on my phone. My daughter's iPad suddenly started talking on its own. It said, "Mama, I didn't get that." I didn't press anything to alert Siri, and it was really weird that it said Mama. I inquired at the leasing office several times if anyone has passed in here, but they said they don't have any information. This past Saturday, on January 5th, my great uncle passed away unexpectedly in his home. We call him Uncle Will. Myself and about 20 members of my family met up at Uncle's Will high-rise apartment, which was not far from where I lived. We stood outside his apartment door while the police and people from the morgue cleaned the scene and prepared to remove his body. Immediately after they leave, half of us enter the apartment. My relatives start the process of removing contents from the fridge, disposing of cigarette butts, empty bottles, etc. I'm just aimlessly walking around the apartment, just one bed, one bath, when suddenly I get this urge to download the Ghost Radar app. I've always been into the paranormal and was anxious to see if my uncle's spirit would come through. I didn't think anything of it when I opened the app, because the first two words that populated were children and community. But as I walk into his bedroom, the app flashes enter. And as I'm turning towards the bathroom, it says almost. Then all of a sudden, I get this feeling to want to search the linen closet. I see normal bath products, but there's a box that appears out of place and looks like it has important documents. I look down and there's a money order. The app then says exact. I'm holding the money order in my hand, and in walks my aunt, who shouts, "Ong, you found the money order." She looks at me and says, "How did you know where it was?" I told her I had this gut feeling and the app sort of led me to it. I had no idea that they were looking for it. Turns out the money order was his last rent payment. I would like to think it was Uncle Will communicating with me through the app one last time. 2 days later, his younger brother, Uncle Jay, who had been battling cancer for less than a year, passed away. I also learned that after Uncle Will visited my Uncle Jay in hospital, just a week before his passing, he was crying profusely and saying he would rather leave than watch his younger brother die. This has been a very difficult time for my family. I'm still in disbelief that we lost 2 loved ones in such a short amount of time. So I work in a prison in the UK. I always like to work nights because you do 7 days on, 7 days off. Whilst on nights, I get locked onto a wing with no keys. We have a sealed pouch with a cell key inside for emergencies, or if someone is hanging and I need to get in to cut them down, etc. I'm in charge of looking after 200 plus prisoners. After a busy few hours, the landing's answering cell bells and doing my checks on people who are essentially on suicide watch. The wing starts to settle down, and through the night, I do multiple patrols. During these patrols, I've witnessed so many bizarre things. Here's just a very small portion of things that have happened to me whilst on nights. Number 1. One night, I was on the 3's landing doing my checks. I heard a loud bang coming from the 1's landing outside the servery. When I went to investigate, there was a broom on the floor. When I reviewed the CCTV footage, you can clearly see the broom slowly being lifted away from the wall it was resting on, and then quickly getting thrown to the ground. We have the footage burned off, and most of the people at work have seen it. We usually show it to new staff before they do their first night shift to freak them out. Number 2. One night, we had someone overdose. He was located in cell 237. I was working the week after all this had happened, and the cell was locked off for police investigation and was completely empty. At about 3:30 am in the morning, the cell bell for 237 was pressed. At first, I didn't even know that this cell belonged to the guy that had died the previous week. But as soon as I looked into the empty cell, I realised and just froze. It takes a lot to freak me out, but I didn't walk back on that part of the landing until roll count. Number 3. There are some minor but still equally as creepy things that happened just last week that prompted me to share this. Whilst walking the 3's landing, one of the showers on the 2's turned on by itself. The only way to turn it on is to press a button on the wall inside the shower. I went to investigate, and the showers were locked and lights inside turned off. This was about 2:30 am. Approximately 30 minutes later, I was walking down the 2's landing and an office door slammed shut. I checked the landings for open windows and they were all shut. Again, every time I hear a noise, I always investigate and love anything creepy, but this sent shivers down my spine. I live in the UK and was about 17 at the time. I was laying in bed on my phone with my lights off, and I heard claws coming up my wooden stairs to my side of the house. This was normal, as I had a basset hound who usually likes to come upstairs to my room. My house has 6 bedrooms and a farm that was converted into 2 houses. My brother and his girlfriend had just moved out, so I had the whole side of the house to myself, which consisted of 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, the living room, and of course the attic. I then heard the claws outside of my door stop, and remember seeing the claws of my dog's paws from under the wooden door. They were black like eagle claws, which bend like talons. If you look at basset hounds, they're the same. So I shouted for him, but he didn't move. My heart dropped when I heard the scratches at my door. They started slowly, which scared me as he's never done that before. I stopped using my phone as a torch and put my side table light on and could still see the claws, but the scratching had stopped. I then told him to go back downstairs and turn the light off. At this point I was a bit nervous, but didn't think too much of it. Then it started again, but this time it was faster, as if he not only wanted to come in, but was distressed. I turned the light on again, this time not seeing the claws. I felt sick and didn't know what to do. The build of my house, if I screamed, you wouldn't hear it from the other side of the house. I somehow found the courage to open the door to be met with nothing but an empty, dark doorway. I locked my door and climbed back into bed until it started again. I whimpered this time to fuck off downstairs as I had college in the morning. Still nothing when I spoke. I turned the light off again and went under my covers. The scratching got louder and more intense this time. I knew it wasn't my dog, and this thing wanted in, and it knew I was in there. I can't remember how long this went on for, as I cried myself to sleep that night. As soon as my mom knew she was pregnant with a girl, my paternal grandmother was elated with her first granddaughter. She knitted caps for me, would cook meals for my mother, and would boast to everyone about her incoming granddaughter. Sadly, she had terminal breast cancer and held on to see my birth in the first year of my life. During the year she was here after I was born, my parents would find her rocking me in an old wooden chair, sleeping with me, cooing and singing while turning the baby mobile to calm me. She quickly deteriorated though and died a day before Christmas, a year and a half since I had been born. After the funeral, my parents went to clean out her house to sell or keep her belongings, and as there was nobody to watch me while cleaning out the house, I would be with them. They would put me in her old room, surrounded by blankets to keep me from falling off the edge. My mom and dad have both recounted times where they would see the shadow of the wooden rocking chair and call out my grandmother's name to have it suddenly stop. I would start giggling out of nowhere, and my dad would run in and see the mobile moving when there was no draft in the air. I also would refuse to sleep in the baby bassinet they brought to her house, and would fall asleep in seconds on the bed. After a while, these encounters stopped and eventually became a memory for them. They stated I picked up on many of her mannerisms, even without knowing her. When I was a child, very young, I'm in my 40s now, I remember experiencing these small balls or beads of light that would come in rows of maybe 8 to 10 and would travel up in a line, up and through my bedroom at night. They were like little trains of points of light that would travel one direction, go through a wall, and come back another direction. Green, purple, blue, reds, really all the colours of the rainbow. They were never frightening, and were actually comforting because I could expect them almost every night. They were not dancing or anything, literally just little points of light of varying colours, all in a straight line like a train, travelling in and out of the bedroom in different locations. They travelled without urgency and at a steady pace, crossing my bedroom of maybe 30 feet in 3 or 4 seconds. Did anyone else experience this or remember something similar? I've asked a few people, and they also remembered a similar experiences as very, very young children. I would say it happened before I was 5 or 6 years old, give or take. I don't remember when it stopped. I never really thought about it, and I suppose it just faded away. One day a couple of years ago, just out of the blue, I happened to remember them. The lights were little pinpoints of colour, kind of muted, not bright, lighting up the bedroom or even causing reflections off the walls. Kind of like they were there and yet not there at the same time. I would say they were small, less than an inch in diameter, maybe even less than a half inch in diameter, all in a line spaced maybe 2 or 3 inches apart. And as I said, the line would just travel across my bedroom, in and out of the walls, heading various directions and changing colours. It was wild to think about as an adult now. I was never afraid, and I'm sure I was awake because it happened, probably hundreds of times, as best as I can remember now. It all started when my parents redid their living room and turned the whole entire side of the wall into mirrors, from top to bottom. It was late 80s, early 90s. People would walk into the mirrors, thinking the room was just that big, because it looked it with the mirrors. I always felt like it was a portal to another side. As soon as it was done, it always gave me creeps being in that room. I experienced everything, and this gives me chills just to write the stuff, but here we go. Hearing my name being called when I was alone, my foot being grabbed to wake up to nobody there, the blanket being pulled off, Always 3 scratched line marks on my body. Doorbell going off and nobody there. House alarm go off for no reason. My dad knocking on my room door at 1 a.m. or late, asking if that was me downstairs making noises. It wasn't. TVs would go on or off, footsteps, sounds of like silverware dropping in the kitchen, and of course, go down to kitchen and nothing on the floor or counter. And others could be in the house with me and experience stuff, like my name being called clearly sounding like my mom, and they would be like, "Your mom is calling you." And of course, say what? And she'd say, "I didn't call you," and friend baffled. So this one night upstairs in my room alone, nobody home, my bedroom door open. You can see the top of the staircase leading up to the second floor where I was at. Loud footsteps start from the mirror room downstairs. You can feel them, so heavy. And they walk all the way to the beginning of the staircase, which is a good amount of steps because the mirror room was a little ways from the start of the steps. Of course, it has my attention. I'm frozen in fear. I can hear a ringing sound in my ears. Everything was so still. And they start coming up the steps. One step, then another. I'm convinced someone either broke into my house and I'm about to see them, or it's something else that's crazy. Because after the 6th or 7th step in that house, you'd be able to see someone coming up. Of course, I don't see anyone, just hearing the steps until it gets to the top step. Then silence. I'm staring out my door, cold sweat, goosebumps all over. Hair standing up, and then all of a sudden, what I think looks like a younger version of my deceased grandfather just walks by. It's a younger, good-looking version of him, not the older, sick version he was before he passed. He's wearing an outfit that's straight out of like 1960s New York City. Top hat matching the suit, and you hear maybe like 2 or 3 more steps in the other room, and then silence. I sat there for a couple of minutes, making sure all sounds were gone. Catch my breath, because it felt like I didn't breathe for minutes, just so frozen. And got up, checked the next room, of course. It was empty. And kind of just went back to what I was doing before, which was watching TV. And that's how things were. Crazy shit would go down. Have an experience, and just move on. After I moved out that place, I haven't had any of those experiences again. I'll never forget all that stuff, and can still remember it like it happened yesterday. I think the house has been torn down and rebuilt into a mini mansion type place by the new people that live there. The houses I grew up in were haunted. Number one, I was in middle school. I can't remember the exact year when this happened. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, my whole family was woken up to every single smoke detector in the house going off. We all ran around the house trying to find the fire, but there was none, and there was no sign of smoke anywhere. My dad regularly changes the batteries, so that couldn't have been it. We had a technician come the next day to see what happened, but even he couldn't find anything wrong with the smoke detectors. We never found out why they went off that day. 2. I was a freshman in high school when this happened. My mum and I were sitting in the family room watching TV when we heard a loud sound from upstairs. Her and I were the only 2 people in the house when this happened. It sounded like someone jumped off the bed. The sound came from my room, onto the floor. My mum ran upstairs and I followed her. We found nothing upstairs, and my mom calmly just walked back downstairs like nothing happened. She wasn't even fazed. When I asked her if she remembered this happening a few years later, she said she didn't remember it and thought I was just making up the story. Number 3. This happened dozens of times from when I was in elementary school until I was a teenager. I had a cheap office chair in my room I would sit on, and I had a desk with a laptop. Every now and then, the chair would start violently shaking for 2 or 3 seconds, and I would jump up and all the hairs on my body would stand straight up. It felt like my heart would stop. I'd look around the room and see nothing around and be utterly confused. Number 4. This also happened dozens of times from when I was very young until I was a teenager. Sometimes when I was home alone and sitting on the couch, I would hear loud footsteps rushing down the steps. I would jump up and run to the steps and nothing would be there. Number 5. Whenever I hung out in the basement at night time, I felt I was being watched. When I started hanging out with my friends in the basement when I was in high school, all my friends would report the same thing. We had an above-ground basement, and you could see the woods behind our house through the windows. Me and my friends would sometimes see shadows near the tree line, and we always felt like we were being watched. I was home for the summer from college. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I was arriving at my house. I had been out at my friend's house catching up and playing video games. No drinking or smoking occurred because that might explain what I saw. So I live on a T intersection and there's no parking on my street. I didn't want to block my mom in because I was a lazy college student and wanted to sleep until noon. So I parked on the intersecting street as I had done many times before. It was dark, just as you would expect at 2:30 in the morning. The hot, thick air had settled for a brief period. I parked my hand-me-down white Buick in front of nosy Linda's house. I shut the door as quietly as I could to not disturb the silence of my neighborhood. Being a quiet neighbor is one of the most considerate things you can be. I put my keys in my pocket as I exited the car, even though I would need them to unlock the door 30 feet away from my present location. Again, I had not had a drop to drink or a bowl to smoke when I saw what I saw. Only cigarettes and water for the evening. I strolled to my front door anticipating a long sleep, and taquitos for my breakfast, or what you'd call lunch. That's when I spied it out of the corner of my right eye. A black, shadowy mass standing in the corner. I took a few more steps as the cold shutter filled my body cavity. Then, I chuckled to myself. What the hell are you afraid of? Nothing is there. Just turn around, I said in my head. With a smirk on my face, I turned around and saw it as clear as a freshly cleaned window pane. The figure standing, or hovering if you like, was about 6 feet tall. There were no legs or arms, but more of a suggestion that it had once had appendages. Its colour was dark black, as if I was standing into the endless swirling pool of a black hole. The only other colour being emitted was a grey face. It looked more like the static of an old tube television on the wrong channel. It didn't so much see me as it knew me. It could see everything I had done and everything I would do. I stared at it for mere seconds, but it seemed like a day. Then I regained what little faculty I had left and sprinted the final few feet to my door. The keys shook in my hand as I struggled to open both door locks. As soon as I got inside, I looked out the peephole, hoping to glimpse the being again, but I could see nothing. I ran to my basement lair and covered my head with my old stinky comforter and shivered myself to sleep. The next morning, I saw nothing and told no one, until I told my friends today. A couple of years later, I inherited my childhood home after my mom passed away. It's been over a decade, and I still have not seen the black shadow standing in the corner. I still look for it, most nights. Something happened, and I'd like some input on the situation. A week ago, I was leaving work and had the feeling of having to throw up. I didn't think much of it because I just had a whole pizza for lunch. As I left the building heading to my car, I got extremely hot, full on sweating and feeling like I got a fever. My mouth started to feel weird and I tasted something ironic. As soon as I touched the door handle of my car, the feeling changed into freezing. I sat in my car shivering and started the motor. I pulled to the exit of the car park and waited for the cars to pass. A few cars passed. A little farther away came another car. I could have driven easily, but for some reason, I couldn't take my foot off the clutch. My whole body refused. I couldn't move because of that uneasy feeling, so I let it pass. I finally drove up behind him, and a few hundred meters further on, a speeding caddy took the right of way. Luckily, he only clipped the car in front of me. The car driving ahead of me was a little too fast, and it was a pretty big one, and there were gladly no injuries. If I had pulled up before him, I would have been the one getting hit. My car is a little older, small with almost no yielding zone, which means I would be severely injured or dead if a bigger car hit me with this speed and angle. As a witness, I of course stopped, asked if everything was okay, and left my contact details. I got back into my car and drove off. After the scene was out of my eyesight, I still was feeling a little uneasy, but much better. I'm not super suspicious or anything, but could it be that I died in another reality? I'm 100% sure the iron taste I had in my mouth was my own blood. The heat was my car being hit, maybe burning, and the cold was my own death, all in an alternate universe. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, my mom sent me to the store to buy something. The store was a straight 5-minute walk from my home. On the way there, I saw my father's best friend, but he looked kind of odd. He didn't smile like usual, and he didn't reply or look at me when I told him hi. He just walked straight ahead, but his eyes looked odd, like empty. I mean, like he didn't look at anything in particular, just in front. He walked in the direction of his house, but I didn't watch him to see if he reached it. We lived almost next to each other. I thought he just had a bad day, so I continued to the store without looking back at him, and then went home. When I came home, I told my dad about it, and I remember it clearly as our conversation went exactly like this. "Hi Dad, Mr. his friend's name, looked really sad today. He didn't say hi to me." My dad, "What are you talking about?" "He died yesterday." And that was it. I got so scared I ran to the bathroom and looked at myself for some time. My father was trying to comfort me after, but I don't remember what happened after that or how I felt. Of course, many people didn't believe me. Most of them said that I just saw someone similar, but to make it clear, I was born in a small town in Poland, and his friend was an Arabic man. He didn't look anything like anyone else there, and it was impossible to mistake him with anyone because of his curly black hair and darker skin. So I'm 100% sure who I saw that time was him. I just don't know how or why I saw him. I learned after a few years that he actually committed suicide the day before I saw him, and his daughters found him dead in his bed. Why do you think I saw it? Did I actually see a ghost? If I knew he was dead, I'd think it was just my imagination. But why would I imagine him when I thought he was well and alive?